Okay, let's gather back in and share some of our observations. So the generational change, social trends, attitudinal shifts, what are you seeing now by way of expectation compared to perhaps what you saw in the past? Some of your observations. Yes?
There's no such thing as a good debate anymore because you'll just Google.
Right, yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're just a few clicks away from any answer on the planet, aren't we? Just bang, yes. No pub trivia works these days, does it, everyone? Yeah, fair point. Other changes, yeah. Yeah, it's an instant world, isn't it? Like, the microwave, like 2 minutes, boy, this is so slow. What's wrong with this thing, you know? Wow, it's, everything contracted in time.
I'm not seeing as much shared housing with young people. Young people used to rent a house together and share. Now it seems to be young people moving straight from rental home to living with a partner, so forming a relationship. The other one is, I think it comes with some of our migration patterns. We're seeing more grandparents living with families, so multi-generation.
Yes.
And some of that comes with extended grandparent care of children, whether or not they're living the same.
Excellent summary of the trends that we're seeing. And share housing was always popular because it was cheaper than getting your own place, but there's something even cheaper that's free with mum and dad. So you can't beat that. Plus use of their car and use of their food. So you're right. I mean, because of the cost of living, we are seeing, and parental attitudes more relaxed. So we're seeing parents and children under the one roof. And then, as you say, sometimes that multi-generational household, sometimes the kids leave and then come back with their own children in tow. So suddenly there's a few generations under the one roof. You've got the cultural diversity in that, you've also just got changed attitudes. So multi-generational households. And it's best represented by the ABS data on this. So in 1911, we had 4.5 people per household. That was the average household size. Those numbers continued to drop until 2011, 100 years later. We got to 2.5 people per household. And in the last few years, something remarkable has happened. We've actually gone up. This century-long decline has turned a corner. We've gone from 2.5 to 2.6 people per household. And it's not that suddenly there are more children per family, it's that this very point that we're living with more people under the one roof. So a slight turnaround. It's only slight, but it does show a turnaround of that trend. So yeah, great observations of these household changes. Other observations, yes?
A lot of young people and teenagers now are Instagramming each other, so they all instantly see what everybody's doing all around the world. So I just wonder whether that sort of makes life a little bit more virtual or does it make them much more aware, or also what does that mean?
Yeah, great. Sure, yeah. Everything is a lot more transparency, a lot more openness, people sharing their whole lives. And, school reunions are just like boring now because everyone knows before they turn up what everyone's doing because it's all there on Facebook. And you're right, it's this global connection, people connected right around the world. And therefore, a trend emerges here, people expect it to operate, in their area. People watch what the trends are and the ubiquity of the connection is at an all-time high.
I'm sort of more negative. The break between the expectation and the reality is creating a lot of depression and suicide we're finding in the youth as well.
Yeah.
Find work, those sort of things is really changing.
It's a good point, it's a generation that's got more opportunity than ever, more options than ever. And it's almost this, well, how do I make something of this life, The most fortunate generation ever, living this amazing time, you can't get a better country than Australia. And all the expectation that places upon them, more study opportunities than ever. And there's this concept of the quarter life crisis you might have heard of. Not just midlife crisis, you've got people in the mid-20s saying, I haven't done anything with my life, what am I going to do? 24 years of age, it's okay, But this is the stress that it creates, and you mentioned the mental health stress and the like. So the fear of failure or the fear of not achieving everything, it's quite a challenge, particularly when you expect to do more younger and when you're exposed to a global world of celebrity and think, well, they're doing that, and I'm older than them, I should be doing something, shouldn't I? And it creates an unrealistic expectation of outcomes. Any other observations? Yes.
We were talking about people want big houses now, and sacrificing their gardens and so forth. And I grew up in a house, as a young adult, I was working, my mother was working, my parents were working, and we were in a 3 by 1.
Yes.
Room or nothing, and that's how life was.
Yes.
You know, and then I guess the other thing we talked about was the debt. You know, this whole thing about people are just getting themselves into so much more debt and all of that now. I remember, you know, my friends getting married and then you trot off to the bank manager to get your mortgage and you hope that your parents knew him from church or something like that because it was so hard to get a mortgage.
Yes.
Now they're prepared to give people, you know, a huge amount of money and then they're basically hopped up to their eyeballs.
Yeah, amazing. The comfort with credit. We've gone from a generation of baby boomers who adopted credit but in a smarter way to a generation that are credit dependent and all too comfortable with that. And you're right on the housing side as well. We wrote a report on this and the rising cost of housing. And yeah, housing costs have gone up, but so has the expectation of what that house is like. And we wrote in this report that we have a generation, many of whom expect to start their economic life in the manner in which they've seen their parents finish their economic life. Nice cars, nice house, nice part of town. Their parents didn't start like that. Their parents started in the little flat, the outskirts, instead of a coffee table, there's a milk crate, you know, it was just starting from scratch. And yet the young people are like, well, this is nice, I might want to continue this lifestyle on. So getting that reality check, I think, is important. And I saw another hand, yeah.
Just expectations on what should be provided with community construction.
Mm.
And it's just not from an individual perspective, but from sporting bodies. You know, 100 years ago, an idol said to mode, you can't make the most of it these days. It is to have player races, drug testing rooms, all these sort of things for potentially some sort of district level facility.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? Yeah, they say that, you know, yesterday's options become today's standards. You know, that's how our expectations grow. We call it expectation inflation. That the challenges of the costs are not price inflation as much as expectation inflation. Well, they've got that, well, we should have that. I saw that on the TV, I want that. So managing these expectations is a challenge. And we sometimes carry over expectations from one category to another. So we expect a new iPhone every year or 18 months. We expect an upgrade to that software every 6 months or so. But physical infrastructure can't be upgraded every 18 months. It's got to have a 20-year life plan or 15 years perhaps. And so we can't carry across the same time frames to the physical infrastructure of our communities, yet we've got a society that sometimes expects that. So managing those expectations is part of the role as well. I see another hand that we missed, yes.
We were talking the first time about age, so you're looking at age groups over 70 and physical activity, which is within the public open space, and saying that there'd be concern for responsibility in that age group. And I was just finding it funny when you put the community centre being the shopping centre, because my grandmother actually does her exercise every week by doing laps at the shopping centre in a really nice group.
Yes.
So in a society where we're starting to use shopping centres less for shopping, going online, we're using them for physical activity and then our parks, you know.
Isn't it amazing? It's amazing. And you know, we've, in a sense, that private space, that commercial space has become the public space. People feel that there's a safety there. People feel a comfort factor there as well. They might not, you know, the local church or community centre is putting on a drop-in or a morning tea, you know, come and new mum's welcome or whatever. But people actually feel a bit more comfortable going up to that cafe and paying for it and just hanging out there for an hour or two. So it's funny, these shifts that we've had and how community has been redefined. Now, I mean, the good thing is the community facilities you're providing, anyone can use them. You know, you don't need money, whereas these commercialised spaces do have some limits as to who can use them or how long or where, and money is the key currency, of course, but it shouldn't be for our community, and what you provide is of access to all, regardless of money. So that's a great thing, but responding to these new expectations is the challenge. Joe?
Do you see any trends related to young people in those centres because they don't buy cars at the rate that they used to? So they're less car reliant and they use public transport and therefore they're in those centres more?
Well, that's right, yeah, often. I mean, if they're located at a good public transport hub, it's the place to hang. But you know, we are pretty rusted onto our cars, and more than half of all households have 2 or more cars. And that's just how our communities have developed, that almost you need that car. So yeah, those who are younger and don't have the car certainly are connecting more with spaces where they can get access without the use of that car. Well, let's move to this next area, which is the generations and the generations define. And if we think about the generations we have, you know, that's who they are. The builders' generation who've built so much of what we know. They continue to build and contribute to this very day, but they've largely exited from the full-time workforce. But as someone well said in the discussion, the builders' generation as grandparents are more active with their grandchildren than previous grandparents were. And from a schooling perspective and dropping them around, because the parents of the little children are themselves busy, the grandparents are taking on more of that role. So they're continuing to build even that very next generation. Baby boomers come in next, and they've redefined things as they have gone. It's interesting that they're a quarter of the population, but they own more than half of the national private wealth. So they have an economic footprint twice as large as their demographic footprint. There's never been a generation like that before, and I don't think will be again. They've been part of this half-century economic miracle. They got into housing early when it was affordable. They've seen asset prices increase significantly. Gen Xers come through next in the family years, but the Gen Ys are now moving into those family forming years and moving into the workforce and leadership roles. Gen Z come in next, the children and teenagers, but they're starting to enter the workforce, and by the end of the decade will comprise about 1 in 6 workers. And Gen Alpha, born since 2010, our largest generation when they're all fully around, and will be this generation that you're planning infrastructure for into the future. You know, they will be the inheritors of much of the public space that is being developed at the moment. Now, they don't get much of a voice, and we probably don't analyse them as much, but we need to think about the lifestyles of these Gen Alphas. What will they be like? What will their expectations be? Because the facilities that are being put together, they will be the leaders of, the inheritors of, and indeed be paying many of the rates and taxes to pay for that infrastructure that's even now being built. Well, keep in mind, with the transitioning of the generations, the Ys and the Zs, while they're a small proportion of the workforce at the moment, within a decade will comprise more than half of the workforce. These emerging generations are the world's first global generations. I wrote a book, came out earlier in the year, and it's entitled The ABC of XYZ, Understanding the Global Generations. And we've got the first global generations now connected, logged on, linked up, influenced by the same music and movies and fashions and TV shows and food, more connected than we've ever seen before. I found it interesting. I was reading in the paper, and I put it in this book, a little article about a young Gen Z fellow. During breakfast the other day, writes Paul Massey of Sydney, our 6-year-old son Lachlan decided to make himself some toast. And so grabbing a piece of bread and on the point of placing it in the toaster, he said to his mother, "Mum, how do I put the bread in? Is it landscape or portrait?" It's this digital generation that are very much influenced by the technology language and the printer formatting terms of the 21st century. Simple tasks have got a bit complex for them, but that's the global generation. The mobile generation, where they move more frequently across jobs, across communities, and of course mobile in their lifestyle and through their technology. They're socially influenced. It's not the world of the experts, but the world of the peer groups that influence choices and decisions. They carry the community with them. They're always on. They're just part of the conversation. That's the reality of today. The visual generation, influenced through the visual channels, not just the traditional auditory channels. They're kinesthetic, they're hands-on learners, they're activist and constructivist in their learning styles. They're visual in output, and they are digital in terms of the technologies that define them and the terms that describe them. So from traditional hierarchical structures that used to form how they were managed in our societies, from this positional form of leadership to the relational form, to the flat structures, from the authoritarian to the participative, from the command and control to the contribution form of leadership, the co-creation, the leader as coach and mentor. These are the leadership forms that this generation responds to. And unless we can get the leadership right, unless we can engage with them in these flat structured approaches, chances are they'll find it a little bit too formal and structural and won't respond to it. Now, if we don't have good leadership, if we don't have leadership that engages, we're going to get substandard outcomes. I see there's another meme doing the rounds online at the moment called "You Only Had One Job" meme. And it highlights what happens when there's not great supervision and great leadership. You get your tiling all messed up. Pretty simple pattern to follow, but without the supervision, sometimes the outcomes aren't great. We need leaders on production lines, otherwise you get the wrong items put in the wrong packages, and that can make things confusing for consumers. And I'm not sure what went wrong with the painting team that was putting safety messages on roads, but something dramatically went awry, and To me, it highlights the need for leadership and engagement and motivation, and to ensure that we can bring the best from the emerging generations. We're talking about this generation who will be the most formally educated generation in our history. From the Gen X's, about 1 in 4 of whom has a degree, to Gen Y's, where it's 1 in 3, to Gen Z's, where about half of them will end up with a formal university qualification. Far more engaged in formal education, far more technology literate, global in connection, as we said, but more sedentary in lifestyle. And so the screen time that defines them requires that we encourage them to get out and participate. Currently, more than half of all Gen Zs are overweight or obese, but on the current trend lines, by the time the youngest of them hit adolescence, that's the trend line as to where we are headed. They are suffering from the lifestyle diseases of today, and all of the great technologies that they have access to and the great things it brings about does or can have a downside. So ensuring that as a community we can provide the facilities and engage with them to utilise them is obviously critical. By getting away from the screens, they can also develop social skills, not just physical skills, but people skills. 1998 was the last year where face-to-face interaction of young people exceeded screen interaction. But you can see the trend lines that has taken place since then, or in fact since the 80s. This is electronic media use, and this is face or social interaction. And you can see the trend lines of both. And now there is far more technology interaction than there is traditional face-to-face interaction. So technology brings about some great things, but it does have a downside that needs to be managed. I put a sentence up here for your consideration. The internet is either the greatest blessing or the greatest curse of modern times. Sometimes one forgets which it is. And I guess when you look at the superficiality of the searching, when you look at the downsides of some of the content, when you look at cyberbullying or sedentary lives or shorter attention spans or the need for entertainment that technology has created, the decline in traditional learning skills, or even perhaps the decline in social skills, we might agree with a comment like this, but it's actually a very old statement written a long time ago, and it was originally the printing press is either the greatest blessing or the greatest curse of modern times. Sometimes one forgets which it is. Now, we probably wouldn't ever say the bottom one because we see the benefit of print. I mean, eventually we probably won't question the top one either. We will just learn to better manage the technology. It does create a generation that has a different way of speaking and communicating. Slanguage is the language of today, such as the texting use of this generation. I put a sentence up here that came my way that I thought I'd get you to decipher. It came from a Gen Z fellow. For shiz, my work gig is totes cron. The hours are devs cray cray but YOLO. I thought we'd see how you go deciphering that to see whether you're in tune with Generation Z. So let's look at some of the words there. Took me a fair while to decipher that one, but for shiz, what does that mean? Yeah, definitely for sure. It's a tweak on that one. Yeah, great. And totes means totally good. And defs means definitely. So they shorten lots of words. It's probs or whatever. So everything's shortened. Cray cray is crazy, and YOLO is only live once. Very good. And cron, short for chronic. Okay, it sounds bad, but normally if things sound bad, they're good. So if something's fully sick, that's a great thing. The reverse of this is also true though. If you do hear a Gen Z, just in addition to hear them describe you as a real hero or a winner, that's not good. Okay, everything's been reversed, so I just thought I'd point that out to you. But it took me a fair while to decipher this, but if we can understand the way they communicate, that's going to be helpful. And what this fellow was trying to say, in a fair lengthy sentence to get there, but what he's trying to say is, I like my job. So that's how this generation communicates. I guess it's imperative that we do understand the generational changes, because in a sense, we're only ever just one generation away from irrelevance. You know, unless we can connect with the next generation and engage them in the use of the public space, unless we can communicate with the next generation of workers so that they can become facilitators or town planners or active in community facility management, unless we can communicate with the next generation of householders and parents, then what we're providing is going to be on the margins of their existence. But I think the speed of change today is such that we're not just a generation away from irrelevance, we're perhaps just a decade away, maybe even just a few years away. we are all in a non-stop quest for relevance. We need to adapt and innovate and adjust to survive in this quest for engagement in these changing times. So the final area I wanted to move to, having looked at the demographic and the cultural and the global, the social and the generational, was to look at the technological and just see the impacts of technology in our era and how we can utilize the best of it for effective communication with our communities today and with the generations to come. We often forget how quickly the technology of today has transformed our era. A decade ago, Facebook was still just being pieced together in Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room at Harvard University. It was not yet public, and yet today, if social media sites were countries, then Facebook would be the largest country on the planet. More people active on Facebook than even people in China. If social media sites were countries, then Twitter would be the 4th largest country on the planet. More people there than even in the US. And even new platforms like Instagram would round out the top 10 if social media sites were countries. That is the speed of the adoption of these new technologies in our globally connected world. The array, the opportunity, the number of platforms and apps for connectivity that the younger generations today have is staggering. We didn't have this sort of social media world. When we were coming of age, I was just thinking about, as a Gen Xer, what was our social network defined by? It was pretty much defined by this. The names you could fit in the teledex, that's the social network. If your dad was very generous, he'd let you pencil your friends' names beside his. That's sort of how it worked for us, didn't it? And it would sit with pride of place beside the phone, on the phone table. Back in the day when you needed a table for your phone rather than a pocket for your phone. What a different world we're living in today. And that's been the speed of change in a generation that has transformed things. We're talking about a generation of screenagers and iGens and generation gamers and .com kids. But keep in mind, when it comes to utilising the technologies and the apps and the platforms of today, it's not just going to connect with the younger people, but the older people as well. The average age of, for example, someone on Pinterest is not in the 20s, it's actually in the 40s. And so it is with a lot of social media sites. In fact, it's not just generation that's retired, but also wired. Googling grandparents and Skyping seniors and silver surfers, that sounds pretty cool. All of the generations are connecting with the new technologies, not just the younger ones. So if you can have a digital presence, if you can communicate through these platforms, it's going to connect not just with the young, but with the old, if we have an array of platforms that we are utilising. So I think the question to ask with technology is not who is using the technology, because pretty much everyone is, and it's not even what technology we're using, because we're all using the latest. We keep updating and upgrading. I think the question is what is not who or what, but how the use of these technologies has changed us as a society. And I think it's made us post-linear. So we're dealing with a society that is not sequential in their processing of information. We're not structural in our mindsets. Classrooms have changed to look like this as we were growing up, to look something more like this. So they don't all face the front. It's not about the teacher who's got the knowledge. It's about the facilitation, about the interaction. We're post-linear. Schooling does not just take place between 9 and 3. The learning takes place anywhere and any time outside of the traditional learning hours. Just as work doesn't take place between 9 and 5 anymore either. We telework, we work remotely, we work anytime. The time frames have changed. It's a post-linear world. The pathways from school have changed. It used to be half the class would leave at year 10 and they'd go off to TAFE or a trade. Nowadays, it's not separated like that. Higher education from vocational education. Multiple pathways and options. It's far more varied than it used to be. So for Generation Z, this generation of screenagers and digital integrators, they have been transformed through the technology to become post-linear. Now they even help the older generations utilise the technology. I heard about a Gen Z fellow who had to keep going around to grandma's house to reprogram her TV because she was pushing too many buttons, and he solved the problem. He grabbed the remote and grabbed some masking tape and solved the problem once and for all. Thought that was not a bad solution. These Gen Alphas are also transformative, and I've called them here in this image, I've called them not just up ages, globals and multimodals, but also Generation Glass, because it is the glass of their world that is the new medium. That's how they connect. That's where they get content from. We were shaped in an era of paper, and for 600 years, it's been paper that's been the mass communication, portable format of content. Ever since Johannes Gutenberg came up with the movable type printing press in 1439, papers dominate as a communicating and transportable medium. But just in this decade, glass has been transformed to a portable mass communication medium. We've had to wait 600 years for this next medium to be transformed for communication, but now it's glass. It's glass that we carry in our pocket, or that we wear on our wrist, or that we wear on our face, or that we will have on a heads-up display on a car coming anytime soon. It's glass on interactive desktops. It's glass that this generation have all around them, and this is the medium that defines them. And so, for the first time, we've got technology morphing with the real world. They're carrying the technology outdoors. It's not the screen inside, it's the screen with them, the portable screen that dominates. We've got to think about the use of glass in these new environments, the use of technology in the outdoor spaces, the ubiquity of the portable and mobile screens. Now, the screens are not yet making us smarter. I looked at the most downloaded app by Australians last year, thinking that it might be a productivity tool or a communications tool or a learning tool perhaps, but alas, it was Candy Crush. That's what we're utilising at the moment. So it's a post-linear world, it's a post-literate world. Technology has changed how we learn and how we are influenced, and it's not just the written, but the visual. If you have a look at the devices that we carry, they are symbol-based. Doesn't say P-L-A-Y on that player on that device. The triangle tells the story. When new technologies come around, they invent new symbols that don't require words to communicate what that particular button does. And so, even outside of the technology space, symbols dominate. In real estate, it's not in words how many bedrooms or bathrooms that they will describe the property, but the icons. And all around we see these icons communicating to us what is taking place. So if we can think about the pictures, the icons communicate through symbols that don't require words, that cut across language barriers and literacy levels and diversity and cultural backgrounds and generational backgrounds, I think that will connect in this era. From a digital space or from an analogue space where the ABCs in our classroom looked like that and would hang there and teach us what the letters stood for, to a digital space where the ABCs are more of the digital platform. Let's just see how you go navigating the digital space. I've got some letters here represented. So firstly we've got A for Angry Birds, that's pretty good. What about B for Blogger, if you're into the blogs? What about C for Chrome? Very good. And D for Dropbox? Very good. And what about E for Evernote, if you're into that? What about F for Facebook? We got that one. And G for Google Maps. There we go. So we're up with the digital technologies and the new ABCs in this new environment. So it's a post-literate, it's an imagery, visual, participative, story-based era today, post-literate and post-linear, and thirdly, post-logical. So how we communicate can't just be through the logical channel, the left brain, the analysis, the data, the information. We are bombarded with more content today than ever before. Last year, IBM put out their big data study, and they said that there is 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created in our world every day. That's a big number, lots of zeros there, but they went on to say that that is so much data that 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years alone. We're living in an era of exponential growth in content, more data than ever. And if we're just adding more data out there, more notices, more memos, more instruction manuals, more content in a written form, then it's going to get lost in the mass. And there are more than 70,000 academic journals in our world, each month publishing new papers. And that means that there are about 2 million peer-reviewed papers published in our world every year, and yet 4 in 5 of those papers are never even once cited by another academic. That means that out of the 2 million papers, 1.6 million never get a mention. Probably many are not even once read, because as good as the research is, it's in long-winded tables and statistical forms, and it's not engaging today. Even from an Australian perspective, there are almost 7,000 PhD theses published in our nation each year, all of about 70,000 words. That's hundreds of billions of words produced every year, and yet the average PhD after all of that work is read just 4 times. I read that statistic recently, which is disheartening for academics, no doubt. And I did find it puzzling because in Australia, most PhD assessment panels have to have 3 people on them, and you've normally got at least 2 supervisors, plus you've got the candidate who's written the thing, so I'm not sure who's not doing the reading of that thesis, probably a couple of those examiners perhaps. Nonetheless, if we just get content out in long training manuals in written form, it's not going to engage. We've got to connect in visual ways, and that's why at parks and public spaces and everywhere else, we have always relied on symbols, because the brain can process imagery far more quickly than it can process words, and particularly in this era, I think that's important. But the symbols are changing. It's not these days just no smoking and no diving. I've even seen this one emerge, no Gangnam Style. Fair enough. Let's help people see it with the eyes, not just of their head, but the eyes of their heart. The power of story and peer influence and the social network and the visual communicates beyond just the written or academic words. The training, the messaging, the advertising has to get cut through in deeper ways beyond just the words. And so if all we're doing is adding more content and bringing people along this cognitive pathway, influencing people through data and information, we'll end up with agreeers who say, yep, I get it here, but I don't get it here. The 21st century really has opened up that vertical axis. Social media, relational connection, power of a brand. It's visual, it's visceral, it's emotional, it's relational. That's where the seekers are found. When we start at the heart and connect with the community, provide a reason, experience, a purpose, a connection, then we have the seeker. And the goal is not just to have people with an emotional engagement, but also with a rational solution. So we need the head and the heart solution. That's where the embraces are found. You know, if you've done some Net Promoter Score surveys or just customer satisfaction surveys, and you find those who give the 9 or the 10 out of 10, it's not just that what has been provided to them has ticked the box and rationally met their needs. It's that how it was done just creates this passionate fan. They just love what you do. They're excited about it. So it's not just a rational solution, it's an emotional engagement. That's why they're embracers and raving fans and they're promoters and influencers. They're passionate about what you've done. So it's head and it's heart. Now sometimes in the community you have not only agreeers and seekers and embracers, but hecklers, those who didn't have a great solution, those who have an issue. We can't deal with the heckler just by going over the rationale one more time. Well, you know, it's at your own risk, or here's what the notice says, or you signed off on this. They already know all of it. The disconnect is not just at a head level, it's at a heart level. It's a relational disconnect, not just a rational one. So what energises the heckling and the pushback is not just this axis, but this axis. We've got to solve all of these problems on both sides, head and heart. That's what is required today. So let me conclude with 4 takeaway words for you. Having analysed the generations, the changes and the demographics and some of the cultural and social trends, I thought that I'd finish with 4 words to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to communication and education, there used to be 3 R's, but 2 of them weren't even R's, so that never worked for me. I thought I'd finish with 4 R's, and they're all genuine R's, and the first R stands for keep it real. It's about the authenticity. It's about communicating with these diverse communities in ways that show the reality and the transparency and the connection in an authentic way. A couple of weeks ago it was Safety at Work Week back in New South Wales, and this guy had the right idea, but how he was getting the message across just sort of lacked a little bit of authenticity. The walk did not match the talk. We've got to keep it real. And secondly, we've got to keep it relevant. So what we say, how we say it, has to connect with the times and the challenges of today. Ever since the GFC, there's been a problem in a lot of workplaces, a lot more people bringing lunch to work. And so I see a guy who's invented an anti-theft lunch bag. See, a lot of people are bringing lunch and other people are sort of taking a bit of bread here and some cheese there. And so this guy has invented this anti-theft lunch bag, and you sort of see the results. He gets these Ziploc bags and screen prints black paint on the outside, and if you put your lunch in, well, you can see the outcome. That's not safe, that is up for grabs. But this one, no one is going to mess with your lunch when it's in that anti-theft lunch bag. That's a pretty cool solution. That's about being relevant to the changing issues. Be responsive to the changing times. Adjust what we do and how we do it to communicate. Sometimes old messages don't work in new eras. This is true in the US at the moment. They've had a safety message at waterways for some time. If you see someone drowning, and that's supposed to be a stick figure of someone saying, help, help, you know, I'm out here in the water. But that's not how we read it these days. If you see someone drowning, LOL. Now, to LOL, to laugh out loud, that's not the right response when someone is struggling in the water. It needs to be updated, that sign. It's no longer relevant. It hasn't responded to the changes. Finally, of course, keep it relational. That's foundational to community, to connection, to social interaction, to meeting the needs of those in our area. And particularly in a social media world, people just expect that relational connection even more, although this one took it a bit too literally, I think. Be the first of your friends to like this post. Probably not quite what was meant by that statement, but nonetheless, when we can keep it real and relevant and responsive and relational, I think we can connect not just with this generation, but with subsequent generations, indeed all of the generations, in all of their diversity in our communities, and hopefully make a big difference in their world. I thought I'd finish with a final story to remind us to be savvy and understand the new generations and hopefully respond in appropriate ways. There was a father who had one of these kippers still living at home with him, his adult son, and the father realised that, hang on, I've funded his degree and I've paid for his lifestyle and he still hasn't got himself a job. So he invites his son into his home office one evening and he says, listen son, you know, it cost me a bit for that degree and you still haven't got a job and I'm still funding your lifestyle, so I've decided to give you a bit of a kickstart in life. You haven't responded to my little hints now, so I've decided to bring you into my company, this manufacturing business. So I've decided to make you an equal owner. So tomorrow I'm going to put you in down at the factory there as supervisor over the manufacturing. And the son says, Dad, thank you for that, but working in the factory? Don't think so. It sounds noisy, sounds dirty. I don't think I'll do that. Father says, well look, I've made you an equal owner, so I guess I can set you up with an office in the headquarters and you can take on a management role. Son says, well Dad, working behind a desk is not enticing either, so I don't think I'll do that either. Father gets very irritated at this point. He says, hang on, I paid for your degree, funding your life, you're still living at home, I've now made you equal owner in the company, you're saying you don't want to work in the factory, we're 50-50 owners, you're saying you don't want to work in the office, so what on earth can I possibly do with you? And the son, he says, well Dad, actually it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. What you can do is you can just buy me out. That's the attitude, some savvy attitudes emerging. So hopefully keep it real and relevant and responsive and relational. Be savvy in your response. I think you'll make a big difference in the future. Thanks for listening and thanks for participating as well. Bless.
Heart's beating very hard after that. That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark. Mark's presentation will be on our website probably by the time you finish your first drink, so you can have a look at it on your phone. We're there, partly. The topic was very fitting for what PLA have planned for the next year, which will concentrate mainly on placemaking, leisure facilities, playgrounds, community infrastructure, programs and events, and engaging the community for health and wellbeing. Thank you for the volunteers this year who've volunteered all of their time and effort for events and supporting events and activities in 2014. And the local governments who've provided their in-kind support and sponsorship, such as the City of South Perth. We urge you to get involved in the industry. Come and talk to us if you've got any ideas, if you want to get involved, to do something, to present something, to talk about something, and provide some feedback on what we're doing. The Awards of Excellence are open, and that's an opportunity for you to showcase what you're doing in your neck of the woods, your projects and facilities and planning. Join us for some light refreshments, and again, please join us in thanking Mark for his wonderful presentation, supported by the Department of Sport and Recreation.